Good morning, everyone, or appropriate to the time of day where you are. I hope you all had a great holiday season and you're ready to jump back into some good CPD today. So as ever, I don't like to waste time with too many hellos or anything. I will just jump right into a brief introduction of the ICCP for anyone who is joining us for the first time today. What is the ICCP? Well, we are a professional members organization that recognizes those with skills, qualifications, and expertise in the professional management of construction claims. We have three main objectives. One, to establish international professional standards for claims management. Two, to give recognition to those who have gained those skills. And three, help educate those who wish to gain that experience. And why is there the need for the ICCP when there are so many construction organizations already in existence? Well, quite simply, people come to claims from a variety of backgrounds, from engineering, quantity surveying, project management, et cetera, and somewhere along the way, they have started to work with claims, either as part of their role or as their full job. And those people deserve industry recognition. So until the ICCP was established, there was no institute that specifically recognized those who have the specialist knowledge, experience, and skills to manage, prepare, and respond to claims to the highest levels of professionalism. I'd like to introduce our steering committee, and today I'll be introducing a new member. I usually don't do a big introduction, but we have just had our annual election, and so I will point out we have a new member of our steering committee, Arcadis Report. Hopefully I've said that correctly. I have never spoken to him, so I probably butchered it a little bit, but he is joining our steering committee, and you can see another familiar name there, today's presenter, Christiaan Grosskopf, whose name I have also just mispronounced. There you go. And in terms of membership, we have 3 levels of individual membership. And as with most organizations, each membership level comes with its own set of requirements that must be met in order to achieve membership. We also have a level of corporate membership to serve companies and companies with departments dedicated solely to claims. And what is in it for the members? Why should you join? The first is to gain industry knowledge. We have a private members area that has a large and growing collection of articles, white papers, case studies, etc., as well as information about education and further training opportunities. We have a bookshop which doesn't actually sell books, but it does review the latest industry releases. We have a library of templates which help members to save time and ensure that their claims are written to the best standard possible. We host regular CPD webinars such as this one. We have the ICCP Academy, which is more technical training that is for members only. We have discounts with publishers and with our training partner Claims Class. We have a monthly newsletter to keep our members up to date. We have industry exposure in the form of a public listing of members, as well as each member getting a logo with their designation that they can use for their own personal uses, such as LinkedIn, CVs, etc. We have a private LinkedIn group where members can discuss their contracts and claims questions in a confidential manner because it's not open to the public. An optional member benefit is the Register of Claims Practitioners, which allows consultants and sole practitioners, et cetera, to have their own webpage and highlight their skills in the claims arena. If you would like more information, please have a look at our website, instituteccp.com. Email me, jennifer.smith@instituteccp.com, or membership@instituteccp.com. And when you registered for this email, for this webinar, if you requested further information, I will be sending you some further information in the next few days. All right, and with that whirlwind introduction, before I hand over to Christian, someone had their hand up and they just said hello. Sorry, let me see. Someone had their hand up, but they have put it down. So I will hand over to Christian. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning, Jen. Thank you very much for that introduction. So let's jump into what we are here for today, and let's have a look at what we can do for you. So alright, what are we looking at today is effectively, are you ready for the FIDIC 2017 set of FIDIC 2017 set of contract documents? A few house rules which I can just mention is that you please, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat or the question and answer section, and or if you want something discussed, just put your hand up and Jen will advise me about that. Alright, so who am I? I'm Christiaan Grosskopf. Don't stress about the pronunciation. That is a tongue twister for many people, and I'm used to I'm quite used to that. People make a bit of a battle to get the stuff out of there. I've been nearly 20 years specifically involved in heavy construction industry, and where we do a lot of FIDIC contracts as well. So let's have a look at what we would like to have a look at. Number one is, why are construction contracts important to us? And also secondly is, why FIDIC? And then why the updates from the previous FIDIC version to the current version. So those are the important things that we would like to do, and we would like to finally just say how to get the message across to the different people. Alright, so now if we look at Arcadis is a consulting company which have been doing annually reports on claims and disputes specifically. And if you look at that, you'll see that the owner, the contractor, subcontractor failing to understand and or comply with its contractual obligations has been ranked, has been climbing in the ranks from last year to this, well, from the previous to the current report, from third to second. Owner director changes, variations, etc., is one of the big dispute sources. And finally also third party or force majeure events, which is quite understandable with COVID and what is going on there. What I've done is I've actually also looked a little bit on historically on these Arcadis reports, and even if you look at employer, subcontractor failing to understand and or comply with its contractual obligations has been climbing. 2015 was 5th, 2016 was 3rd, and last year it is top ranking. But if you look at the others, you'll see there are quite a lot of specific issues which needs to be addressed. Now I have a look at the recent report from Arcadis, and if you look at the average dispute values, 32 million in 2016, up to 54 million on average in 2020. And if you look at this graph over here, how it's climbing in the different regions. What is interesting is that in most of these areas, or North America and the Middle East, the last 3 years, the reverse of going down has now changed again, and you get a climb of disputes. It could well be COVID, it could be other things. But I think the important thing is global average value of disputes increased to 54 million US per dispute. That's not small money. And that's why we need to look at ways to understand, to prevent claims and problems to develop to disputes. So let's have a quick look at why FIDIC. FIDIC is well accepted globally. It's an international federation of consulting engineers. It was founded in 1913, and today we are close on 100 member associations. So it is very well understood and accepted in the construction world. Next thing is different contract formats for different applications, and if we quickly look at what is the choice of which FIDIC to use. If you start off with a straightforward project, yes, you want to do the short form of the contract, which also now has got a new book. If it's not straightforward, then you need to go through another set of gates to decide what you want to do. Employer design, yes, then you go for the red book. If it is not employer design, then you look at different things. Is it a contractor design, planned and or high unforeseen risk, but no maintenance, the yellow book, or if it is a bot project, the golden book, and if it is minimal risk, fixed price, lump sum, little employer involvement, no major unforeseen risk, and read that no major unforeseen risk, we go for the EPC turnkey project. Recently now, there's also a new book, which it was published in 2018, the Emerald book, which is specifically for underground works and areas with potential high risk of excavation, underground risk, geological and geotechnical risk. Ideal for dams, power, underground works, tunnels, hydropower, things like that. Alright, that gives us a bit of the different contract formats for the different applications, but we're really looking at three main contract forms, being the red book, which is conditions of contract for construction, building and engineering works designed by the employer. Secondly, the yellow book, and which is for plant and design built for electrical and mechanical plant, and the name has now been extended, and for building and engineering works designed by the contractor. So if you look at these two, the main difference really is a red book designed by the employer, usually the engineer on behalf of the employer, and designed by the contractor, the yellow book. So this is really the major risk difference of these two books. Then you get the silver book, which is like the yellow book, but effectively most of the risks lies with the contractor, and but it's something which we really need to be very careful when we use that. So that is the three main contract forms. One nice thing about these three contracts, they are standardized. If you look at the different items, it's the same structure, it's the same um, clauses, and just adjust it for the different risks. All right. So why the changes for 2017? The reason provided by FIDIC, and I agree with that to a large extent, it's an to increase the clarity and give more certainty, reduce the risk of disagreements over the interpretation of contractual terms, introduce mechanisms for dispute avoidance, not dispute resolutions, dispute avoidance, and improve contractual provisions by making them more prescriptive, introducing step-by-step project management and procedural mechanisms, and setting out exactly what is expected from each of the different parties. All right. Why this changes? The first FIDIC major forms, the first edition, is now nearly 2 decades old. And during that stage, problems were identified through evaluation of disputes and arbitration cases. Lessons were learned, potential improvements were considered and then potential improvements were considered by the updating task force. So the whole idea is to get a set of books which eventually will reduce disputes and make certain things clearer and to clarify matters. Now, if you look at that, they introduce mechanisms for dispute avoidance, and we will talk a little bit about that dispute avoidance and adjudication, where it was previously just dispute adjudication. It becomes much more prescriptive, not only what to do, but also how to do it, and in what time frame, and also what happens if you don't do it. It introduced step-by-step project management and procedural mechanisms. So not only you've got to do that, but you've got to do A, then B, then C, then D, then E, then etc. And it set out exactly what is expected from each of the employer, the contractor, and the engineer during the performance of the contract. So the summary of changes, if you look at the old and new FIDIC 1999 version and the 2017 version, general conditions of contract, in 99 there were 20 clauses, and claim 20 was claims, disputes and arbitration, which now has changed to 2 clauses: employers and contractors claim, clause 20, and clause 21, disputes and arbitration. And a lot of emphasis is there on avoidance. The structure is the same. You've got, previously you had 20, now you've got 21, but clause 1 is still similar. Clause 1, clause 2 is the employer, the new clause 2 is the employer, clause 3 the engineer, the new clause 3 is the engineer, or in the silver book the employer's requirements. So it's the same structure. The only real difference in the structure is the split of clause 20, which is now the 2 versions. What is also interesting in the employers and contractors claims, previously clause 20 was effectively contractors claims, and 2.5 was employers claims. Now they put it all in one, in effect, and what they basically say is what is good for the goose is good for the gander. It's the same procedure. It's not that the one is a lighter procedure than the other one. The contractor, to submit a claim, has got to, the employer, if he wants to submit a claim, he's got to jump through the same hoops as the contractor. Then on 21, previously we had a DAB, a dispute avoidance board, or in the pink board a DB, a dispute board, and now it is a DAAB, or a dispute avoidance and adjudication board. So previously it had a bit of avoidance, but it wasn't very strongly emphasized, and now it becomes quite strongly in the new version. The particular conditions is split into two parts. Very much the same as for those of you who knows the MDB version, the pink book, which has got a part A, contract data, which is similar to the old appendix to tender, but greatly enhanced. It allows for filling in the required data as mentioned in the general conditions of contract. And there's nearly 80 data items to be filled in. And then you've got special provisions. Now, for instance, you will have application for interim payment. The contractor shall submit a statement to the engineer after the end of the period of payment stated in the contract data. So it is a place is in the contract data made for that specific information, or if not stated, at the end of each month. Same, the IPA be submitted on one paper original, one electronic copy, and additional paper copies, if any, as stated in the contract data. And again, as stated in the contract data. So you don't have to, in your particular conditions, to so much extent as to say delete item B or add after B the following. It makes it easier. There's a spreadsheet just about of all of these items that need to be filled in, and you can fill it in and without having to mess around with the general conditions of contract. When we talk, so there's a sample of what it is. You've got subclause 14.3, period of payment. What is the information? Number of additional paper copies of statements, fill in. Percentage of retention, fill in. Limit of retention, fill in. So you've got 80 of these items to be filled in the red book. Something similar in the yellow book, and I can't remember, I didn't count what it is in the silver book. But you have got all of these things which you then need to just work on. Okay. The special provisions, when we look at that, it's very important to look at another book which the FIDIC has issued, which is the 5 Golden Principles. Now, these are incredibly important when you set up a tender document or a construction contract. First of all, the duties, rights, obligations and responsibilities should generally be as defined in the general conditions and appropriate to the requirements of the project. Don't try to rewrite the general conditions through the special provisions. The particular conditions must be drafted clearly and unambiguously. This is fairly standard practice, but I have seen so many times where people read something and they write it because they understand what they want to say, but if you give it to someone else, that same message doesn't go across. Be incredibly careful with that. Particular conditions must not change the balance of risk or reward allocation provided for in the general conditions. If you want a red book, don't use this yellow book and rewrite it so that it becomes sort of a yellow book, and vice versa with any of the others. The whole idea of the FIDIC contracts is there's a balance risk, and keep and select the correct book and then make minor adjustments through the special provisions. Also very important, parties should have reasonable time in which to perform their obligation and exercise their rights. This can become quite a major problem if you go into a dispute or in arbitration, and if the arbitral tribunal consider that you didn't give them adequate time. So be careful about those things. And then finally, which I very much like, is all formal disputes must be referred to a dispute avoidance and adjudication board. What is different, previously in the 1919 version you had a standing board for the red book and you had ad hoc for the yellow and the silver books. Now the problem with the ad hoc is you can't really do dispute avoidance. You wait until the problem is there, then you get the dispute board in place, so then there's no prevention anymore. That's why in the new version it has got a provision for all of these as a standing board. What is also interesting is that you have to nominate your potential members as part of your tender. What is further important is, or interesting, is that the World Bank has now adopted these books, but in their COPA, conditions of particular application, they made the appointment of the dispute board, or the DAOP as it is mentioned now, as a prerequisite for commencement of the works. So usually we have got the 4, but that is now also a precondition. You need to have your DAOP in place before the commissioning. I cannot stress this enough. It makes such a big difference if you've got a DAOP in place. Alright, to help in clarification of certain terms, the definition section, clause 1, has been drastically enhanced. FIDIC 99 was split in different subsections, but in 2017 it's just alphabetic. Now 1999 had about 60 definitions. Just look at the amount of definitions you've now in the new book. For instance, force majeure is not there anymore. It's now called exceptional event, and the reason for that is because the certain legal in certain countries, force majeure is a legal definition, so that is why it has been changed. It also specify what is in writing. Concurrency is specified, what is concurrency, and also an extension of time is now defined. But remember that because your conditions of contract is high in the hierarchy, that also is applicable. These specifications or these definitions are applicable on the specifications, the drawings, the schedules, and other support documentations. We often find that in the conditions of contract you talk about procedures on approvals or review procedures. The review procedure is now defined in the general conditions of contract. So when you write your specifications, make sure you don't have an analogy by saying something different. And what they use in the 2017 is not approve, but no objection. Keep that in mind. In the contract, the following words and expressions shall have the meaning stated except where the context requires otherwise. in the contract, not in the conditions of contract, in the contract. So everything relates to that. I just touched on review and outcome of a review. Previously it was approve, not approve, approve with notice, with comments, etc. But what is we've got now, make sure that it's in compliance with the contract. And what is the scope of a review? A review means examination and consideration by the engineer of a contractor's submission in order to assess whether and to what extent it complies with a contract and or with a contractor's obligation under or in connection with a contract. We've seen so many times that the engineer's review tries to improve on the comments of the contractor. Guys, no, that's not the job of a review. A review is, does it comply? Not, it's supposed to go better. Even in the Red Book, the outcome, the engineer shall within 21 days after receiving the contractor's document and his notices, etc., give a notice, capital N. We will come back to notice, capital N, to the contractor of no objection or fail to comply with the contract with reasons. So you've got only two outcomes: no objection or fail. Not no objection if you change the following. If you want to do that, you've got to put something in the particular conditions to bring that in. But remember what I said, the engineer is not there to redesign or improve on the comments formally of the contractor. Remember, definitions of the contract is a whole. Specifications need to sync with the conditions of contract. What is also quite interesting in the new this new documents is if the contractor, if the employer has the rephrase, if the engineer has to do further reviews of the same document, let's say revision 1 comes in, engineer makes certain comments, revision 2 comes in, some of the comments has not been addressed, the further reviews can actually become a claim from the can be claimed from the contractor. So if the engineer is having to do 2, 3, 4 reviews when it was supposed to be only 1, the employer can claim that additional cost from the contractor, which for me is fair. If they don't do it properly the first time and you have to do it the second, or the engineer has to do it second, third time because of the the contractor's inadequacy of his submission, then he should pay for it. If the employer incurs additional cost as a result of such resubmission and subsequent review, the employer shall be entitled to subject clause 20.2. Remember I told you the employer now also runs under the same claim clause for payment and or EOT to payment by the contractor if the cost is reasonably incurred. Of the costs reasonably incurred. Would like you just to point out a few things. Okay, notice capital. Engineer, contractor, we usually know them as capital. Review, capital. Review period, capital. All of these things are now in the definitions. It is now a defined term. It's not what is a review anymore, question mark. It has been defined in the conditions of contract. Good. What is a notice? When do we need a notice in the new contract? What is considered a notice? Now, when do we need a notice? capital N, just about for everything. Communications are now generally done through notices, and we'll just tell you what is considered a notice just now. But this surprises that comes up from either the contractor or the engineer is drastically addressed in this new version, which also makes it administrative quite heavy. But a lot of these, as I said, surprises are they try to prevent surprises. There's nearly 100 items listed when a notice has to be issued, and often it's a notice and a cross notice. Now, what is a notice? Under subclause 1.3, it has to be written, which it was before. Identified as a notice, it has to state notice, not just a little bit wording anymore. This is now, it has to have the word notice in there. It has to say that it's identified as issued in accordance of subclause 1.3 or relevant clauses, and outcome is deemed often accepted. That happens if you it's a written communication, identify as a notice, states it's issued in accordance with a subclause. And what happens if a person doesn't respond to if a party doesn't respond to a notice in a specific time? Most of these notices now has got a default. If the engineer gives no notice within the period of 21 days, the engineer shall be deemed to have given a notice of no objection to the contractor's document. So it's not that it's just hiding there, hanging around, wondering what is the outcome. And this is one of the things where the engineers will have to be quite careful. They often some of them were lax on responding to certain notices. But now generally, most of the documents, most of the notices has got a time period and has got a default if it is not responded to. All right. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of procedures that is specified. Now, just out of interest, let's just have a look at the procedure that is specified for a claim. And you'll say it's a claiming party, the engineer, and the other party. So the claiming party can be the employer, and then the other party is the contractor, or vice versa. Claiming party can be the contractor, and then the other party being the employer, as we usually have it. This is, say, engineer, so we're looking at the red or the yellow book. So there's an event. Claiming party becomes aware, or should have become aware, of the event day 0. The notification has to go to the engineer, notice to claim to the engineer, describing the event, and within 28 days. Notice from the claiming party to the engineer, CC to the other party. Notice to describe the event or circumstance, and to be done ASAP, but not later than 28 days. Then the engineer has to respond. Engineer checks if the notice was issued within the stipulated time frame within 14 days. He has to check if this 28 days has been complied with, and he has to do that within 14 days. If it was submitted within 28 days, if it was not, then the engineer has to give a notice to the claiming party that the notice is not valid with reasons. All right. it states what the claiming party can do. He can still submit the claim, but he has to give reasons why he considers that it is not necessary to have, or that he did comply with the notice period. Alright, so the engineer needs to respond within 14 days. If he didn't, it is deemed a valid notice. So if you just keep quiet, it's a valid notice. However, if the other party says, no, this is not a valid notice, he then has to go and say, Mr. Engineer, I disagree that is a valid claim, a valid notice. All right. Employers require, I just want to check one thing quickly if I didn't miss anything. Yeah, no. That gives you an idea of just how detailed some of these processes are described in the new contracts, but also the importance of making sure that you don't miss out on any of these items, because you'd have got deemed outcomes if there's no response. Okay. Now let's look at the employer's requirements you get in the yellow book and the silver book. That is now elevated into the contract conditions. Which gives it a higher importance. Previously it was further down, and it needs to have the technical requirements in there, things like fit for purpose. Just remember, fit for purpose is a very la-di-da clause. Fit for purpose, no. Fit for what purpose? It has to be described properly, not just fit for purpose, because different people can consider fit for purpose with different things. The testing regimes has to be in there, the types, the regimes, the results. Administrative requirements has to be in there. Meetings, what, how often, who to attend. Documentation, what documentation, the content that it needs to have in there, how it has to be provided, when it has to be provided. The support, etc., for the engineer, training, etc., needs to be in the employer's requirement. And errors in the employer's requirement, depending on a few issues, in the yellow book, errors in the requirement is the risk of the employer, and in the silver book is partly the employer's risk, but a few areas is also the contractor's risk. Alright, now if we look at the engineer needs to be a natural person to act on behalf of. Often you'll have a company is identified as the engineer. Nowadays they also have to specify who is the engineer, a natural person. It's not only Parsons or Parsons Brinkenhoff or whoever. You have to identify the individual that can sign on behalf of the engineer. So that has to be identified through a power of attorney. It's not a delegation of authority. In the old subclause 3.5, it says that the engineer's role cannot be cannot be delegated to someone further down. It has to be specifically there. It also now makes sure that the agent, the engineer is the agent for the employer, and neutrality is only in subclause 3.7. And it can't be delegated. And people, this is something which I see so often, both in the old 3.5 as well as in the now 3.7. The name has changed. It's not determinations anymore. It's consultations and determinations. Because many engineers never bothered to look at the consultation part. They usually only looked at the determinations. So even in the heading of clause 3.7, which is the old 3.5, it says consultations and determinations. And remember that the project manager or CRE or someone like that cannot be delegated to this authority. The document, the contract, specifies the use of 3.7 quite extensively. It's mentioned in about 27 subclauses in the Red Book, and about 15 different issues where the engineer has to make a consultation and or a determination. There's about 10 new duties. Delegation of authority in writing, engineer representative to be, that's another one. I forgot to mention that one. Delegation of authority has to be in writing, and the engineer's representative has to be full-time on site. This is new, and this is something that you need to consider. Other major changes in the duties of the engineer: call and be called for meetings. Previously he could have said no, but now he has to call and he has to be called for meetings. He has to give advance warning, and he has to be given advance warning if he sees problems arising. Taking over the works and sections is quite drastically revised. Notice to correct is revised. The employer and contractor's claim, that's new and revised, and clause 21, dispute and arbitration, is also quite drastically revised. Okay, now let's look at I'm not going to look specifically at the contractor. The contractor has still got the same high volume of obligations, but what becomes quite extensively here is the notices which he has to give. But let's look at the difference between the new DARB versus the DB or the DAB. Nominations as part of the tender documents, and as I mentioned earlier, that the World Bank has now made appointment of the DARB a prerequisite for commencement. Then previously, the Silver and Yellow Book was was ad hoc, and only the Red Book was a standing DAB. And what the DARB brings in is this emphasis on avoidance. So what I would like the takeaways really is FIDIC, the range of synchronized contract forms makes it much easier to understand. If you know one, you have immediately a feel for the others. The new FIDIC documents has raised the bar for all, but for very good reasons. And then finally, what I would like you guys to consider is, how are you going to equip yourself and your people to face this new challenge? And my personal thing, which I always share, get your DARP constituted early and make full use of it. And that wraps up my discussions.
Thank you, Christian. Sorry, I was answering someone's question. Someone had asked about the replays and the slides, and those will be posted on the website by the end of the week. So if you either requested information or if you're a member, you will receive that link. And if you did not request information, then just look at the website, instituteccp.com/webinars. Sorry, I am going to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry. I closed it and I wanted to know why is it. And I forgot. I forgot to stop to share my screen. Thanks.
Okay. So nobody has put a question in the question and answer box, but I think, in my humble opinion, as a non-professional, it sounded very clearly put out, and several people have put in the chat box that you did put it out very clearly. Does anyone have a question? Please put it in the Q&A box.
While you're looking at that, I think what I'd like to share with you is that it is a different document. It's similar, but it definitely requires more attention. Don't get caught out that you think, it's just another FIDIC. It's a really, the notices alone is such a administrative heavy, I call it administrative heavy, and it can drop you in big dwang. The one thing which I did forget to do right from the beginning, and Jen, would you be so kind as to do the poll quickly, if you don't mind? I was halfway through and then I said, let's just do it to the end. I always like to know who are the audience. So if you won't mind, Jen, if you could submit the poll, and if you guys could just tell me what is your professional background and who are you currently representing, and what is your experience of 2017 contracts?
Yes, sorry about that, Christian. I was waiting for your poll slide to come up.
Yeah. No, I forgot. Halfway through, I said, I wanted to do that, and it is, as I always say, Alzheimer is a bugger. All right, guys. So let me see what is your answers on that one, and we'll give a few more seconds, if you would be so kind.
Yeah, answers are still
you can see what is the progress. Yeah.
Looks like nobody else is answering, so I will go ahead and end the poll, and let's have a look.
Yes, please. All right. Large engineering quantity surveying make up most of that. Legal guys, understand, for the legal guys, understand the importance of the DARP and the administrative procedures. That is quite important. Who are currently responding? Employer, largely the contractor. Mr. Contractors, you guys will have to be very careful of all these notices. Engineers, architects, you have to also up your game. I've been engineer for most of my life, or representing the engineer for most of my life. fair amount of time on the contractor, but mostly with the engineer. It is going to ask a lot of you from an administrative point of view. And I'm glad to see that there are already 2017 physically going, but it is a slow starter. It's similar to the 1999 was also quite a slow starter, but I do know that the people has got a concern with it being so administrative heavy. Good.
Well, when we do construction clinics, we still occasionally get 1987 questions. So
yeah,
they're really behind the curve.
Yeah. No, I know that. I mean, I know that Philippines, I think, got a special request into to FIDIC to use the 99 versions for an extended period. I know that Pakistan Engineering Council has just updated their COPAs, their conditions of particular applications, but based on the 1999 version. So up till last year, they still use the previous version. So yeah, it takes some time for these things to get into place. But bottom line is, don't get caught out when you have got this new one in front of you. I think it is a lot of advantages because of a specific endeavor to reduce disputes and by making things more clearer and describe specific procedures, but it is administratively heavy. All right.
All right.
No questions.
Well, I have gotten a bunch of thank yous in the chats. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Well done. And we've just had a question in the Q&A box. What is the difference between D&C and EPC contract, and the difference between engineer and employer representative?
What's the difference between
D&C and EPC?
Design and construct. All right. So what you're talking, the design and construct is the yellow book, and EPC contract. EPC contract is also a design and construct, but the risks in the silver book, the EPC contract, is much higher on the contractor, where the yellow book, which is design and construct, is a more balanced risk, and the EPC contract is much more risk on the contractor. It's really, use the silver book for very specific type of things. Let's say you've got to build a factory, and this is the second, third, fourth, fifth factory of the same thing. That's ideal for an EPC contract. I know a lot of the banks and clients like EPCs because it's supposedly a fixed price contract and it doesn't change, but when you do have high risks, you're going to pay for that. The contractor will add a 20% on that. Now the problem that you do face is because we lean towards giving the project to the lower the lower prices. So when you have a project which has got a lot of risk and you expect the contractor to carry all that risk, like in a silver book, what you find is that he price for that risk and some of them price less for that risk. And the end of the day is you award the project to the guy that didn't price for the risk or didn't understand the risk, and then you're going to start having to cut corners when these problems start rising, or he's got to look at other ways to ingenious ways of trying to make up some money, or he can just wrap up and walk off. So be very careful when you want to use the EPC contract, if you don't want to pay more.
And the second part of that question was the difference between the engineer and employer representative.
All right. The Red Book and the Red and Yellow Book talks about the engineer as the really as the employer's representative. But in the EPC contract, which is supposed to have a turnkey, EPC stroke turnkey contract, think again of it as the client comes to a contractor and he says, build me this factory, and when it's ready, bring me the keys. Turnkey. So much less influence from a employer's representative, either an engineer or a employer's representative. That's why they don't call it an engineer in the Silver Book. That role is watered down quite drastically, and that is why it is that specific terminology difference.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more question. What are the commercial consequences of having the same scope under the 3 different contracts, Red Book, Yellow Book, and the EPC contract?
My understanding, Ashraf, and you can confirm just if I understand you correctly, is what is the differences in choosing Red Book, Yellow Book, and EPC contract? Is that correct? Is that what you're asking for?
Yes.
Okay, great. Commercial consequences. Red Book, the design is usually not in the tender. That goes as a separate service contract to the engineer. Secondly, the Yellow Book, the design is usually, most of the design forms part of the tender because the contractor needs to do it. Then, but your risk is still balanced. There's a very strict set of rules what the contractor has to design and what he has to design accordingly. And if the employer requires something different, or if there's a mistake in what we call the employer's requirements, it goes there. The contractor has got a recourse to recover his costs. So you will expect that the Yellow Book is more expensive than the Red Book for the contractor because that includes the design, which is a separate cost if the client wants to use the Red Book. Then the EPC, because of the risk and the risk that he has to take, that then becomes quite an expensive contract form. Take, for example, you've got a foundation, a building with a foundation, and you start excavating and you thought it was going to be soft and now it is hard. In an EPC, generally the contractor carries that risk, even if the employer's requirement said the foundations will be soft. In the Yellow Book, if the employer's requirement said the foundations will be soft and it is now rock, then the contractor has got a claim against the employer to be remunerated for the rock. So that is where the pricing comes in.
Okay, so Ashraf, if that did not answer your question, please just ask a follow-up. We have another question from the contractor's side. How about the engineer's determination is not fair, say approving variation and claims? What is the mechanism to be done without going for a DAB because it is in the early stages?
My answer is get your DAB in right from the start. That I understand what you say. All right. So the engineer makes a decision. The contractor is unhappy about that. He feels he's been done in, but he doesn't want to make noises because for the rest of it is. The new DAB, and especially the DAB, then you just go to the and you can do this also with the previous one, is you go and say, Mr. Engineer, please let's ask the DAP what they think about that. Remember the old one, you could ask for a recommendation or a determination. A lot of people don't know that you could ask for a recommendation or an informal comment. In that case, you can go for an informal comment, but for the informal comment, which is in the old one, clause 20.2, I think, if I remember correctly, and what you basically then say is, Mr. Employer, would you mind us putting it in front of the DAP and see what they say? You are not bound by the decision, but it is great to have a different set of eyes looking at that. If you don't want to go to the DAP and your negotiations fail, well, in that case, suffer.
Okay. All right, thank you. And one final question. In variation orders, usually what was being granted is the cost aspect while denying time adjustment. Do you have any suggestions how to engage the engineer or employer in regard to the time impact of variation orders?
First of all is, why should you accept a VO if there's a time impact in it? Why should a VO not have a time impact? Now, all right, some guys are not wanting to say anything and say, all right, VO cost. Nothing stops you from, as soon as that VO is signed, to say, this is going to cost. Now I know that. Now, as soon as the VO is signed, remember, that VO is not in place until it has been signed, or until it's been instructed or approved. In the old version, it's instructed or approved. Then the VO is alive. Before that, the contractor is not allowed to do anything on that VO, and is also not allowed to stop working on the work that was not in the VO. He still has to continue. So at that point, when that VO has become effective, now he knows that there is a potential time impact. If he wasn't allowed to do that as part of his VO, if his VO was only cost, now he can go clause 20 and say notice to claim. But remember, in the new one, you may have to look at that. You need to advise them that there will be a time impact on the VO. You'll have to give a notice to say it is going to impact the time.
So that may be an important difference between the contracts. All right.
Yeah, no, that's the principle is still very much the same. The only thing with a new set of contracts is notices is becoming a much more important item. And as I said, 16 about more than 100 notices which you require to be notified. It's not just saying that we expect that, and said you need to say to the people this is going to cause an extension of time. Remember also, you can refuse a variation order from the beginning to say that it is going to change the program. Then it's the engineer's prerogative to say no, still do it. So that is where you need to have a look at. If you think it's going to change the schedule or the sequencing, you need to say that. Don't leave it and want to play good guy and then cry afterwards. No. If you don't play open books, don't expect people to smell what you're thinking.
Indeed. All right, and John just said thank you for that.
Good, yeah.
All right, and with that, that was our final question. So Thank you very much, Christian. I think judging by all of the well dones and thank you very well presented that we have commented in the chat, that everyone got a lot out of this.
Good. 100%. Thank you everyone for your time. It is appreciated. It's a bit funny that I can't hear you. It's sort of talking to the screen, but I still enjoy sharing this level of information. Bottom line, I always say that, guys, get your dispute boards in place. If you're not sure how to, contact me. But really, and it helps everyone. It helps the project. It doesn't help the contractor and not the employer, or the employer and not the contractor. The quicker you can resolve it, the quicker you can prevent a dispute, the better for everyone.
Okay,
Brilliant.
thank you, everyone.
Jen, thanks for everything, and everyone, thanks for your attendance.
Right. Bye.
Good. I'm out of here.
All right.